Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Independent Thought. My name is Desmond Price. If you are a first-time listener, welcome to the podcast. If you are not a first-time listener, welcome back. And for those of you who are interested in the break that we just took in this season, I will have a personal note for all of you listeners at the end of this episode in our third segment. So, the title of today's episode, Cannabis, COVID, and Climate Change. It has been a couple months since we spoke, and I've been trying to figure out, during this break, what exactly the topic was that I wanted to come back to. There's a lot going on in the news right now, whether you're talking about censorship of Joe Rogan or what's going on with Ukraine or Tucker Carlson's take on M&Ms and how sexual they should be. There's lots of things that I could talk about. But for me, I thought the first and most obvious thing was talk about COVID, talk about the pandemic. But there's so many takes going on about vaccine mandates and hesitancy and misinformation and schools. And there's so many things going on. I wanted to take a slightly different approach. I'm sure that some of you who follow me on Instagram recently saw me talk about this new study that's been done out of Oregon State University. The study conducted at Oregon State University is how I want to start this episode, but just come with me a little bit here. We got a few different ways I want to branch off of it. But first and foremost, let's talk about this study. Research done at Oregon State University found that there are cannabis compounds that, in a therapeutic way, combined with a vaccine regimen, can actually prevent coronavirus infections by blocking the virus from entering human cells. Now, when I first saw this, I immediately thought it was fake news. And I think it's a little weird that my mind kind of like went to that path. But when I first saw this news, I was like, there's no way that can be real. But sure enough, it is a legitimate study. I will have a link to this, to where I first got the information from, down in the episode description, along with several other links, but we'll get to that a little bit later in the episode. But when I was able to realize this was, in fact, a real study, this is an amazing turn of events. Like, I would hope that more people would be very excited about this. However, this story really hasn't gotten that much coverage, if any at all. And we'll get to the reasons why that is in a little bit here. But a little bit further into the study itself, it was saying that not only can the virus, protect, or not only can these compounds protect your cells from the virus entering them, but if you already have been infected with coronavirus, if you are currently sick, taking these compounds in a concentrated form could actually slow, or if not stop, the spread of the virus that is in you currently and the disease that's causing it for people who are currently infected. Now, I'm not going to lie, there was a lot of extra, science related discussion that was going on in the articles that I was read about exactly how these compounds interact with your body, so on and so forth. Instead of getting into that details, I will just say again, I would direct everyone to go to the link that is in the episode description for a more broken down process of how these compounds interact with the virus itself. But I also want to say that we are in an age of people being weary of any and all information about COVID that doesn't come from certain sources. We are now living in the age of where people are very, very on edge about vaccine hesitancy and COVID misinformation. So I just also want to say up front that the study was in fact peer reviewed. So just, be aware of that. So this study does seem to have some merit behind it, but they also said that the study does need to have more human trials, because as of now, they've only studied it in a laboratory setting and also in mice. So it has not been studied in humans as of yet. But the findings point to the cannabis compounds as quote unquote virus neutralizing, capable of blocking the entry of COVID. However, you would need a high concentration of these compounds in order to achieve this result. So they're thinking of putting these compounds either into a liquid form that you would digest or into a pill. So this is all good news. And I wanted to start coming back to the podcast after this break with some good news. There's so many negative news topics, and I'm sure that we will get to them very shortly, but I haven't done a story that felt good in a while. So I wanted to bring people some good news, a little bit of hope going on when it comes to COVID and the pandemic, another tool that we might be able to add to our ongoing arsenal to deal with the pandemic. But I also want to talk about something along the same vein as these cannabis compounds, which is something that maybe some of you are aware of, maybe some of you aren't, but I want to talk about it really quickly and I'll explain why at the end. So in December of 2018, some of you may know this, some of you may not, but President Trump at the time signed what was called the 2018 Farm Bill. Now, this Farm Bill legalized industrial hemp here in America. So after like decades of this crop being caught up in like a broader cannabis prohibition, hemp, industrialized hemp, was now legal here in America. And I actually came across this story about, I think, a year after it happened in December of 2019. And I was a little taken aback that not only had I not heard about it until then, but it made basically no headlines. Again, for those of you who are unfamiliar, hemp is supposed to be considered by many this like miracle plant. So many applications, so many things it can do. The fact that was not really getting a whole lot of coverage seemed really troubling to me. And even since then, it would seem as though not that many people actually realize the fact that hemp has been not only legalized on this industrial level, but that there are people who are farming it across the country now. I mean, prior to its legalization, America was importing like $600 million worth of hemp a year from countries like China and Canada. Now, this crop, I mean, hemp itself, for those, I might be telling people something that they already know, but if you don't know, hemp can be turned into just about anything, it would seem like. I mean, I'm exaggerating a little bit here, but let me just run down a quick list of all the different things that you can do with hemp. So hemp can be used to make chocolate, shoes, flour, animal feed, paint, shampoo, diapers, nail polish, carpet, ink, solar panels, supplements, skin products, milk, batteries, cars, it's ridiculous, fabric, concrete, and these last two are the ones I want to focus on: paper and plastic. Now, I know I just rattled off a long list of things, but let me highlight paper and plastic for a second here, because this is where I really want to put the focus on it when it comes to hemp in particular. So hemp paper, for instance, if we were to invest more in hemp paper here in America, it would be leading to less deforestation, which we all know has been a huge issue for climate change. We're talking about getting, carbon out of the atmosphere. We need to have more trees on this planet. We shouldn't be cutting them down. If we had an investment into hemp paper, that would help lead that cause. Also, hemp paper happens to be more durable than wood paper. And it's also easier to process and requires fewer and less toxic chemicals. Also, it grows extremely quickly compared to trees, which can take decades to grow. So what's more amazing than just the paper applications are actually the plastic applications. Hemp plastic seems to be incredibly beneficial. So let me just talk to you a little bit about what's going on here with hemp plastic. One of the reasons why it lends itself so well is because of the fact that it has cellulose. All plastics, no matter where they're derived, require cellulose to structure the uniquely moldable yet durable characteristics of plastics. So for the longest time, we've been using oil, petroleum, as our go-to ingredient in order to make plastics. Basically, all plastics are made out of oil, right? But unlike these oil based plastics that we currently have basically for everything that you can think of in your life. Look around your home or your apartment right now, or your house or your apartment right now. Like, ask yourself, how many things do you own that are currently made out of plastic right now? It's a staggering thing, right? But this hemp plastic will actually be organically grown and is non-toxic. Not only that, but it's biodegradable. Hemp plastic is completely biodegradable, unlike plastic, well, regular like plastic, which I guess to a degree it's biodegradable if you count the fact that it'll take maybe over 1,000 years for it to actually decompose, versus hemp plastic will take about 3 to 6 months to fully decompose, and it can be recycled indefinitely. It is also, again, not toxic whatsoever. You don't have to deal with things like BPA when it comes to hemp plastic, completely safe. And again, renewable resource, which prevents soil erosion. There's less water involved, so you don't have to worry about water pollution as much. It absorbs toxic metals and can be cultivated over and over again. I mean, compared to these oil-based plastics, hemp plastic is actually 3.5 times stronger and 5 times stiffer. So as a result, it's more durable and lower chance of breaking, which makes it safer. So, I mean, all in all, it is a superior product to oil-based plastics. And so the question that I have, that is probably a natural question to ask after this, is like, where's the issue here? If hemp is this superior, as far as like oil would be concerned, as far as plastic is concerned, and also talking about paper and various other things, then why aren't we seeing more products here in our country that are hemp based? I mean, you would think eventually that the market would take over, but it would seem as though one of the issues that we are seeing is that there's a lack of processing facilities here in the States. So even though that hemp was legalized here in America and there were farmers able to finally go ahead and grow it and cultivate it, you have to have processing facilities in order to turn the raw hemp into all these various products that we just talked about. And that is where the hiccup is currently here in our country. We don't really have any facilities here in America. Well, not that many of them. Let me rephrase that. Not that many facilities here in America. In fact, as of March of 2020, there were no facilities in America whatsoever that could compost hemp. This was leading to a lot of different issues. In fact, even in the state that I live in Montana, I was able to find so a little bit of a testimony here from somebody talking about their experience with farming hemp. The person here in particular, his name is Salvia Harris. She was talking about how she got into hemp farming in Montana in 2017. And said at first it was really easy, it was really great, it was profitable, but then the processing got bottlenecked. A lot of farmers were like, well, I'm not going to do this again next year because I have tons and tons of hemp bales sitting in my barn just rotting because I cannot take them to get processed, or the price of getting them processed was way more than they were willing to spend. And this is really across the board. It seemed like there was an issue that was happening not just here in Montana, but all over the country. There are just not that many processing companies here in our country. And so the issue that we are now faced with is, what are we going to do about this? Because as I was stating previously, hemp has so many benefits as far as not just paper and plastic, but all those different other things I listed. It would have a tremendous benefit, not just, for society. I mean, not just for not just for those industries, but also for society as a whole, just thinking about the environmental impact of being able to replace plastic with a biodegradable form of it. And so what do we have to do in order to get more of these processing plants up and running here in the country so to make this start to become a reality? Well, there was two things that I wanted to talk to you guys about here today. The first is, you can support hemp companies. As the demand rises here in the States and more interest grows, I think it'll become natural for private companies to want to invest more into these processing plants. And it'll just help some of these local hemp companies in general, just, be able to sustain their business practices. So if talking about hemp farmers, hemp plastic companies, and for those who are interested, I have some links again in the episode description for a few companies that I was able to come across. I wasn't able to get a ton of them, but I got a few. So I'm going to link those in the description. Definitely check some of these companies out. If you can, support these companies, buy some products from them, share their stuff on social media. We definitely want to support companies that are trying to promote a more healthy society for us all. But on top of supporting people directly, if you can, because I know that not everyone has the money to support these types of things, another thing that you can do is ask your state and local representatives to invest in hemp or to invest in, more specifically, hemp processing facilities. Because here's the thing. We as a country, we probably spend over $1 trillion a year on various different things. You know, just for instance, we spend $800 billion a year on our military budget. Our military budget, while we're currently not at war, we spend that much money per year, 800 billion. My point I'm trying to make here with that is that there is plenty of money to go around to invest into things that are incredibly beneficial. We talk so much about climate change, about how it's an existential threat, but we haven't really seen a whole lot of movement on our government's behalf in order to address this existential threat. So I bring this all to you now. There's also resources at your state and local level as well. And some of these people, if you actually do take the time to call them, they really probably don't take a whole lot of calls from their constituents. I mean, not only would you probably get through to these people, there's a good chance they'll take you seriously if you take the time to reach out to them and tell them what it is that you're interested in. So I would definitely recommend that, especially in a year like this year, where not only your state and local reps, but people are running for Congress, running for Senate this year. They're going to come asking for your vote this year. This might be a good time to tell them what you want in return. So I just want to put that out there, especially for these congressional candidates who are gearing up for primaries right now. If they want your vote, tell them that you need something in return for this. And so I kind of want to bring this back to the CBD story really quickly here, because it's not just hemp that really needs our help, but it's also, if we're going back to the CBD study, one of the persons who was involved with that study was saying that the government kind of needs to step up on this end as well in order for this research to take forward. So Richard Van Bremen, he is the first author on the study that I referenced at the beginning of the episode. He's also a professor of medicinal chemistry at Oregon State University. And going back to the study again, he was saying that these compounds can be taken orally and they have a long history of safe use in humans. And he also went on to say, we don't want to get overexcited, but we think it's clear what the next move by the Biden administration should be. They need to legalize marijuana so that this research can look into all avenues, including THCA, and fill America's breadbasket with cannabis plants and send every person in America all the marijuana extracts they need to finally end this thing. And so there is a role for the government to play here in trying to bring about some positive change in these two stories. Legalizing marijuana would, for so many different reasons, be beneficial, but particularly for this story, it'd be able for researchers like this guy at Oregon State University and the team of other people around him to be able to further do research into this to see if there is a way that we could legitimately bring the pandemic to a grinding halt, if there is a therapeutic in cannabis that can be cultivated to help people ultimately stop the flow of the virus once it's in them. I mean, that would be a massive game changer. To know that we could probably do that if people just had broader access to cannabis research through legalizing marijuana. We need to just ask for that now. We need to ask for that right now. The way that things are going right now in America, marijuana will most likely be legalized at some point in the next 20 years, like nationally. But we shouldn't have to wait that long. We shouldn't have to wait every 2 years for one or two more states to legalize it, then one or two more states to legalize it. We should just get it legalized nationwide right now. This isn't a red or a blue state issue. It hasn't been. I don't think it ever has been at any point in history. I mean, truthfully, even red states like South Dakota, Alaska, Arizona, and now Montana have fully legalized marijuana use. If you're living in a state that hasn't yet, get on the phone with your people, with your constituents, and tell them to get their shit together. It's time to legalize marijuana completely. It's time to invest into hemp. It's time to invest into hemp processing facilities so that we can finally make the bridge away from oil-based plastics. Because here's the thing. This is the part of the episode where I really want to focus on climate change. We have been talking about for a long time the need to move away from fossil fuels. But what we don't talk about is what exactly that transition will look like. And there's so many different parts of that transition that are going to be very important. But one thing in particular that people need to recognize is that we have a lot, and I mean a lot, of plastic that is involved in our society. It's not going to be as simple as just finding new things to do that don't involve plastic. I mean, we have plastic in damn near everything that you see in your house. I mean, it's all over the place. So rather than trying to replace plastics with something else, we'll just create a new form of plastic, which is not toxic and biodegradable. Enter hemp into the chat. So as we're making this transition away from fossil fuels, we need to be able to have the infrastructure in place in order to replace this toxic plastic with more environmentally friendly plastic. So if you are interested in calling some local reps, I highly suggest that you do that. Invest in these hemp companies, again, hemp farmers. Don't forget those links in the description. And if you're interested in calling your representatives in Washington, the phone number is 202-224-3121. You can reach your representatives in the House and the Senate through that phone number. Give them a call. Someone does listen. Give them a call. So I want to thank everyone for taking the time to listen to this first half of the episode. If you liked this first half of the episode, please share this episode on social media. And if you wouldn't mind, go ahead and just tag Independent Thought where you share it at: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, wherever it is that you are sharing this at. Thank you so much. We're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we'll have my guest for this week. Stay tuned. Welcome back from the break, everyone. Thank you for sticking with us through this break. First of all, I want to thank all of the subscribers. If you are subscribed to this podcast and you are checking out every episode, thank you so much for doing that, especially those who have been sticking with me through this past break. And especially if you're a subscriber who's been with the podcast for over a year now. I mean, my hat's off to you. I'm over here clapping, really softly away from the microphone, so it's not like banging in your ears right now. But, major thanks to you, and a major thanks. Maybe there's gonna be a better word than major. A colossal is a strong word. A huge thanks to the people who are subscribed to my Patreon, all of you who are not only investing in me, but in this podcast. I mean, it is so greatly and deeply appreciated. I just can't even tell you, especially those who stuck around through the last couple of months while I wasn't putting out episodes. Thank you so much for investing in Independent Thought. There's going to be plenty of good things to come throughout the rest of this year. I also want to thank my guest, Blair Walsingham, for coming on to the podcast and dropping a tremendous amount of knowledge. I am hoping to have you back on again in the future. But also for taking the time to talk about universal basic income. I get the feeling that will be a topic that we will revisit in the future. Speaking of the future, what's next for the podcast will be my final candidate episode for the season with Claudia Zapata. She is running for Texas's 21st district, and the primaries for Texas are right around the corner. I mean, it seems like early voting will start in 2 weeks, so we got to get that episode out to the people. Following that episode, though, I will have another full regular episode coming right after that. I told some of you that I would give you my thoughts on Joe Rogan and censorship of his podcast. So I will do that. That will be the next topic that I bring to you. And usually when I do any episodes, I spit off a bunch of facts that I've researched, and then I'll give you my opinion in between. I think this will be one of those rare times where that's not going to be the formula. I'll just be giving you just straight opinion, nothing but opinion, throughout the entirety of my take on Joe Rogan. So also, before this episode is finished, I wanted just to briefly touch on why I picked these topics. So climate change in particular was something that we heard so much about in the primaries leading up to the 2020 election. And for those of you who have been with my podcast from season 1, I don't recommend going back. If you have, let me just not even talk about season 1. It was a bad season. Let's not talk about it. But if you have listened to it, this podcast started in the 2020 primary season. I watched every single debate. I watched so many interviews with all those people. Like, I was full junkie mode when it came to everything that was going on, reading the polls every day, so on and so forth. And all like 4,000 people who were running for president leading up to the 2020 election, they were all in lockstep about how climate change was an existential threat. And I gotta say, I understand that we're living through a pandemic right now, but the conversation around climate change has all but come to a whimper, if it even exists whatsoever at all. So this existential threat is now no longer even spoken about. And that just truly doesn't sit right with me. It really doesn't. I don't understand how you can get the whole country to be on board with how much of a threat this is. And now that Democrats are in office, there's literally no movement whatsoever. And if there is any movement, it's them saying, well, we have some provisions in the Build Back Better bill, but that damn Joe Manchin and Kirsten Sinema, they just won't let us pass our legislation. We rejoined the Paris Climate Accords. Isn't that something? It seems very weak. It all seems very weak, and not the response that you would expect from people who called it an existential threat. At the same time, I also wanted to touch on the story that there's maybe something that we could do. Too often, I feel like I'm coming on this podcast and I'm just giving people just bad news after bad news after bad news. And it's like, well, what are you going to do about it? So I thought this would be a nice story that we could talk about, where I'm giving some information, but I'm also more or less trying to implore people to get involved, to get back into a little bit of activism. I recently did a poll on Instagram, and it would seem that half the people, the question I asked was, do you feel as politically engaged or motivated as you did a year ago? And more than half of the respondents said no. And I understand it. I really do. I'm not trying to make anyone feel bad for answering that way, but I would hope that people would kind of flick the switch at some point and maybe get just a little bit more back into it. Because while 2020 was a horrendously bad year, it was positive in one way. And that one way was people were very politically motivated. And if things are ever going to generally improve in our country, it's going to be from for lack of better words, a more activist movement amongst us, the people, actually taking the time to understand the issues happening in our society and demanding change versus hoping that politicians will deliver it while we're not paying attention to what they're doing. That's not going to work. It hasn't worked. It's not working currently. I don't think it's going to work in the future. I think things aren't going to get better unless we demand better, and we can't demand better if we don't know what it is that we're missing. So that is my hope for sharing a story like this and future stories that will come. To kind of wrap this up, though, I want to say that I said at the very beginning that, I have not been on the podcast for the past couple of months, and I was going to give you a reason for it. The truth of the matter is that, without getting into too many details here, your podcast host has been dealing with some ongoing medical issues. They have more or less kept me from being as consistent with the podcast that I would like. I am hoping that they are behind me now, but truthfully, I just do not know. So my hope is that the podcast will kind of rebound and kind of go back to its normal schedule. But I just don't know that I will for sure. But I'm going to take it 1 week at a time, and hopefully, it will kind of all like level itself out, even itself out, and things will kind of get back to normal. But all in all, I want to just say lastly, before we end off here, that I do appreciate those who did take the time to come back after this break, and I'm hoping to have lots more for you throughout the rest of this year. So thank you for sticking tuned to Independent Thought. And like I said at the beginning of or right before the first break, if you liked this episode, please share this episode on social media, tag Independent Thought. We'll see you in the next episode. Have a good week.